"Mom, please don't let him take our house." Ellie's voice broke through the wind just as the landlord carried Mara Bennett's last bag onto the porch. Mara turned. Her 8-year-old daughter was standing barefoot on the cold wooden floor, crying because her boots had been packed inside the bag. Her 6-year-old son, Noah, was already shivering. Outside, snow was falling so hard that the street had almost disappeared. The landlord looked at Mara and shook his head. "You're done here. Please." Mara's voice cracked. "My children have nowhere else to go. You should have thought about that before you stopped paying." "I didn't stop paying. I lost my job." "That isn't my problem." Mara reached into her coat and pulled out everything she had left. 3 $20 bills, 2 5s, 10 singles, $90. "I can give you this tonight," she whispered. "Just let us stay until morning." The landlord glanced at the money, then at the children. Then he pushed her hand away. $90 won't buy you another night. He shut the door. The lock clicked. Mara stood frozen on the porch. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she bent down, put Ellie's boots on her herself, zipped Noah's coat to his chin, and picked up the bags. "Come on," she whispered. "Where are we going?" Mara looked into the white darkness beyond the porch. "I don't know yet." She hated saying it, because mothers were supposed to know. By midnight, the 3 of them were miles from town. The storm had swallowed the road. Mara's fingers had gone numb, and Noah had stopped asking when they would reach a motel. That scared her. She pulled him against her chest. "Stay awake, baby." "I am awake." "No. Talk to me." "About what?" "Anything." So Noah talked. He told her about the toy truck he had left behind. Ellie cried quietly because she knew they weren't going back for it. Then Mara saw the ruins of an old house. The roof was gone. The windows were black holes. But one stone chimney still stood. She touched it. Warm. Mara immediately pressed the children against it and wrapped herself around them. That chimney gave them just enough heat to survive the night. She didn't sleep. She counted their breaths. Every few minutes she touched Noah's cheek. At dawn, she saw a burned cabin farther up the mountain. An elderly man stood outside. He looked at her children, then at the $90 in her hand. "I'll give you the cabin for that." Mara couldn't believe him. But as she reached for the deed, the old man's fingers tightened around it. One warning. His eyes moved toward the floor. "Whatever you do," he whispered, "don't go downstairs after dark." Mara stared at him. "What's down there?" The old man looked toward the blackened cabin. Then he answered quietly, "Something that survived the fire." Before we continue, tell me in the comments, what city are you listening from tonight? 3 weeks earlier, Mara Bennett still believed she could save her family. She had been working the breakfast shift at a roadside diner outside Black Hollow, West Virginia, starting at 5:30 every morning and leaving after 2 in the afternoon. The pay was modest, but it covered the rent, groceries, and the small amount she needed for Noah's asthma medicine. Then the diner closed. The owner blamed rising costs. Mara blamed herself for not having enough savings. She had $600 in the bank. 2 weeks later, it was gone. Rent came first, then electricity, then Noah's medicine, then food. Mara started making decisions that didn't feel like decisions at all. She stopped buying meat. She watered down the children's juice. She ate toast for dinner and told Ellie she wasn't hungry. One evening, Ellie caught her putting half a sandwich back into the refrigerator. "You can have mine, Mom." Mara smiled. I already ate. Ellie didn't believe her. Neither did Noah. But the hardest part wasn't the money. It was Daniel. Mara's husband had left 11 months earlier. He hadn't died. He hadn't disappeared. He simply decided that being a father was easier from somewhere else. He moved to Ohio with another woman and stopped sending the $300 a month he had promised in their divorce agreement. When Mara called, he told her he couldn't keep rescuing her. You need to learn to stand on your own, he said. She wanted to tell him she had been standing on her own for nearly a year. She wanted to remind him that the children were his too. Instead, she hung up. Then came the final blow. Her landlord gave her a 5-day notice. Mara spent those 5 days calling shelters, relatives, churches, and cheap motels. Her older sister refused. Her mother was dead. Daniel didn't answer. By Thursday night, Mara had packed everything she could fit into 3 bags. She had sold her mother's silver bracelet for $47 that afternoon. That money, combined with what remained in her wallet, brought her total to exactly $90. She had planned to use it for a motel room, but when the storm warning came, every cheap room within 20 miles was taken. That was how Mara ended up standing outside her locked apartment door with 2 frightened children. She didn't know about the cabin yet. She didn't know about the old man, and she certainly didn't know why a dying stranger would sell a burned mountain property to a woman he had never met. All she knew was that the storm was getting worse. So she picked up Noah's bag, took Ellie's hand, and started walking toward the only place she had ever heard might still have an empty shelter, a church 12 miles north. They made it less than 3 miles. Then the road disappeared beneath the snow, and Mara realized they were no longer walking towards safety. They were walking deeper into the mountains. Mara didn't remember the last mile clearly. She remembered Ellie's hand inside hers. She remembered Noah stumbling behind them. She remembered the wind cutting through her jeans. And she remembered thinking that if she stopped walking, even for a minute, she might not have the strength to start again. The church was still miles away when Mara saw the cabin. It sat beyond a line of bare pine trees, half buried in snow. One side of the roof had collapsed. The front porch was black from an old fire. 2 windows were broken. Smoke did not rise from the chimney, yet an elderly man stood beside the front door. He wore a heavy brown coat and held a wooden cane. He watched Mara approach without saying anything. Then his eyes moved to the children. Come inside. Mara hesitated. The man frowned. They're freezing. That was enough. She carried Noah through the doorway while Ellie followed. The inside smelled of wet wood, ash, and something older. The fire damage was worse than it looked from outside. Half the kitchen ceiling was gone. Several walls were blackened. The floor sagged near the back room, but there was one small bedroom where the roof had somehow survived. Mara looked at it. Can we stay here? The old man stared at her. You don't want this place. I don't need to want it. She looked down at Noah. I just need somewhere my children can sleep. The man's expression softened. My name is Walter Hale. Mara Bennett. He nodded. I know. Mara froze. How? Walter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to an old wooden desk and pulled out a folded document. This cabin belonged to my brother. He placed the paper on the table. He died 3 months ago. Mara expected him to ask for money she didn't have. Instead, Walter said, $90. She thought she had misheard him. What? Give me $90. The cabin is yours. Mara stared at the document. That can't be legal. It can. Why would you do to? At? Walter looked toward the children. Because nobody else would take it. Mara counted the money slowly. She almost hated giving away the last thing she had. But she signed. Walter handed her the deed. His fingers trembled. Then he leaned closer. There's something you need to understand. Mara looked up. Walter's voice dropped. The fire wasn't the only thing that damaged this house. He tapped the floor with his cane. There's something underneath it. Mara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. What? Walter looked toward the dark hallway. Don't ask me during the day. He paused. And don't ever go down there after dark. Why? His eyes met hers. Because sometimes, he swallowed, you can hear it moving. Before Mara could ask another question, Walter walked outside. She watched him disappear into the snow. But one thing bothered her. As he walked away, he never once looked back at the cabin. He looked afraid of it. The first night in the cabin, Mara slept with one hand around the fireplace poker. Not because she believed Walter Hale's warning. At least, that was what she told herself. The cabin had too many noises. Wind pushed against the broken windows. Snow slid from the damaged roof. Old timber creaked whenever the temperature dropped. Any of those sounds could explain what she heard. At 2:17 in the morning, there were 3 knocks beneath the kitchen floor. Mara opened her eyes. Knock, knock, knock. She sat upright. Ellie was asleep beside Noah on the mattress. Mara listened. Nothing. She almost laughed at herself. Then came a slow, scraping sound beneath the floorboards. She grabbed the poker. Who's there? Silence. She stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, survival became more important than fear. There was almost no food in the cabin. Mara found half a jar of flour, 2 cans of beans, and a box of salt. The water pipes had frozen. She filled a cooking pot with snow and placed it beside the stove. Then she spent 4 hours covering the broken windows with old blankets. Ellie helped gather pieces of wood. Noah sat near the fire, wrapped in 2 coats. Are we staying here forever? He asked. No. Mara smiled. Just until we figure things out. But she knew the truth. The cabin was their only option. By the 3rd day, Mara discovered something strange. While repairing the kitchen floor, she noticed one section of wood was newer than the boards around it. The nails were different too. Most of the cabin used square-cut iron nails. These were thin, modern steel nails. She removed one. Underneath the board was a small brass marking. 3 lines crossed through a circle. Mara stared at it. She had seen the same symbol before. It was carved into the stone fireplace. She checked the wall. There it was again. 3 lines, 1 circle. Her stomach tightened. Someone had deliberately marked parts of the house. That evening she asked Walter about it. He had returned with bread and a small bag of potatoes. When Mara showed him the nail, his expression changed. Only for a second. Then he looked away. Where'd you find that? Under the kitchen floor. Walter reached for it. Mara pulled her hand back. What does the symbol mean? Nothing. You're lying. The old man stared at her. Then he sighed. My brother used to mark things he didn't want forgotten. What things? Walter looked toward the damaged wall. Things people were willing to kill for. Mara felt the room go quiet. Before she could ask another question, 3 knocks came from beneath the floor. Walter's face went pale. He stood immediately. Keep the children away from that room. Walter, don't touch that floor again. He walked toward the door. Mara followed him. What's down there? Walter stopped with his hand on the handle. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered, Something my brother spent 40 years trying to keep buried. And he walked into the snow. For the next 4 days, Mara tried to convince herself that the knocking had been nothing. She had more immediate problems. The temperature inside the cabin fell below freezing before sunrise. The firewood Walter had left them was almost gone, so Mara spent hours outside chopping dead branches with a dull axe she found behind the shed. Her hands cracked from the cold. Her shoulders ached. But every evening she brought enough wood inside to keep the fire burning until morning. She also learned which floorboards were safe. The kitchen floor was not one of them. Noah refused to walk across it. "Something lives underneath," he whispered. Mara tried to laugh. "Nothing lives under the floor." But she didn't believe herself anymore. On the 5th night, the knocking returned. This time, it wasn't 3 knocks. It was 5, slow, evenly spaced. Knock, 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 knock. Ellie sat up. "Mom?" "I heard it." Mara reached for the poker. Noah buried his face against her arm. Then came another sound. A scrape, directly beneath the kitchen. Mara stood. She took 1 step toward the hallway, then stopped. The children were watching her. She couldn't investigate, not with them there. So she dragged the mattress into the living room and placed it beside the fireplace. For the rest of the night, she sat awake. At dawn, she found something outside, a fresh boot print. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Ellie's. And it wasn't Walter's. Someone had walked through the snow during the night and stopped directly beneath the kitchen window. Mara followed the prints. They went around the cabin, then disappeared. She stood there staring at the snow. A gust of wind blew across the mountain. Something caught her eye beneath the porch, a cigarette butt, still fresh. Mara picked it up. She hadn't smoked in 9 years. Walter didn't smoke, and the children certainly didn't. Someone had been watching the cabin. That afternoon, Walter returned. Mara was waiting for him. "Someone came here last night." The old man's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened around his cane. "How do you know?" She showed him the cigarette. Walter stared at it for several seconds. Then he looked toward the tree line. "You need to leave." Mara shook her head. "I have nowhere to go." "I'm serious. So am I." Walter lowered his voice. "You don't understand what this place is." "Then explain it." He didn't. Instead, he asked, "Have you found anything?" Mara hesitated. The brass cymbal came to mind. She hadn't told him about the second one. "No." Walter studied her face. For the first time, Mara realized something. He wasn't afraid of what was underneath the cabin. He was afraid of who might come looking for it. That night, Mara locked the door and pushed the kitchen table against it. Then she checked the children. Both were asleep. She was turning away when she heard it. Not knocking. A faint metallic sound, like something being dragged across stone. It came from beneath the floor. And then, from somewhere under the cabin, a man's voice whispered one word. "Mara?" She froze. Someone beneath the house knew her name. Mara didn't move. The voice had been so faint, she wondered if the storm had created it. Then it came again. "Mara." This time, there was no mistaking it. Someone was beneath the cabin. She grabbed the fireplace poker and stepped backward toward the children. Ellie woke first. "Mom? Stay here." "What happened?" "Nothing." Mara hated the lie as soon as she said it. She took the lantern from the table and approached the kitchen. The voice did not return. Instead, she heard a soft metallic scrape. Then silence. She looked down at the floorboards. The brass cymbal was still visible beside the wall. 3 lines, 1 circle. Mara crouched and touched it. The board was warm. Not room temperature. Warm. She pulled her hand away. There was something underneath. Not an animal. Not a person. Something mechanical. She examined the boards more carefully. The section with the strange nails was slightly raised. Mara found an old screwdriver in the kitchen drawer and worked the nails loose one at a time. After several minutes, the board lifted. Beneath it was darkness, but there was no dirt. There was a narrow wooden panel built into the foundation, and carved into that panel were 4 numbers. 9, 4, 7. Mara stared at them. She didn't know what the year meant. Then she noticed a small brass keyhole. Her heart began beating faster. She searched the cabin. Nothing. Not until she remembered Walter's warning. My brother used to mark things he didn't want forgotten. Mara looked at the fireplace. 3 lines, 1 circle. She moved the iron grate aside. Behind it was a loose brick. Inside the opening sat a tiny wooden box. Mara pulled it out. The box was covered in dust. Inside was a single brass key, and beneath the key was a folded photograph. Mara opened it. The picture showed 3 men standing in front of the cabin many years earlier. One was Walter. The second was a younger version of the man who had sold her the cabin. But the third man made Mara's blood run cold. She knew him, not personally, but from the newspaper photograph she'd seen years earlier. Thomas Vale, a wealthy developer who had spent decades buying mountain properties around Black Hollow. The back of the photograph contained 6 handwritten words. Vale must never find the lower room. Mara read it twice. Then she heard footsteps outside. Slow. Heavy. Someone was walking toward the cabin. She extinguished the lantern. The children were still asleep. Mara silently moved toward the window. Through a gap in the curtain, she saw a man standing beside the woodpile. He wasn't wearing a winter coat. He was holding something in his hand, a flashlight. Then he looked directly at the window. Mara stepped away. A moment later, someone knocked on the front door, 3 times, exactly like the sound beneath the floor. Mara didn't answer. The knocking stopped. Then the man outside spoke. "Mrs. Bennett?" Mara's stomach tightened. "I know you're in there." She held the poker tighter. The man continued. "You bought something you don't understand." Then he walked away. Mara waited until his footsteps disappeared. Only then did she look back at the hidden panel. The brass key was still in her hand. And suddenly, the question wasn't what was beneath the cabin. It was why so many people were terrified that she would find it. The man returned the next morning. Mara saw his truck before she saw him. A dark blue pickup stopped at the edge of the property, its tires crushing the fresh snow. The engine stayed running. Mara locked the door. Ellie stood beside the window. "Is that the man from last night?" "I don't know." But Mara did. The driver's door opened. The man walked toward the cabin carrying a leather folder. He was in his early 50s, clean-shaven, wearing an expensive wool coat that looked completely out of place on the mountain. He knocked once. "Mara Bennett. My name is Caleb Vale." Vale. The name from the photograph. Mara didn't open the door. "What do you want?" "I'd like to make you an offer." "For the cabin?" "For everything." Mara looked at the children. "How much?" Caleb slid a document beneath the door. $18,500. Mara stared at the number. For a woman who had owned $90 3 days earlier, $18,500 sounded enormous. It could pay months of rent, a better apartment, food, Noah's medicine, a used car, maybe even enough to start over somewhere far away. Caleb spoke through the door. "You can walk away today. Take the money. Forget this mountain." Mara didn't answer. Why do you want a burned cabin? Development project. That doesn't explain $18,500. Caleb paused, then he sighed. The county approved a private access road through this property. My company has already paid contractors. We've got equipment scheduled for next week. So you need my land? I need a clean title. Mara remembered the photograph. Vale must never find the lower room. She looked down at the contract. There was something strange. The offer described the property as 1.8 acres. But Mara remembered Walter saying the cabin belonged to his brother. She hadn't asked how much land came with it. Why not buy the property from someone else? Because there is no one else. His voice hard, Ned slightly. Your deed is the problem. Mara's fingers tightened around the paper. What problem? Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he said, Sign this, and I'll have a cashier's check delivered by noon. Mara opened the door only far enough to look at him. You knew about the deed before I did. For the first time, Caleb's confidence disappeared. Only for a second, then it returned. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. I think you're the one who made it complicated. Caleb looked past her. His eyes landed on Ellie and Noah. Then he lowered his voice. Mrs. Bennett, you're living in a damaged cabin with 2 children in the middle of winter. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. But Mara understood it. He knew she was vulnerable. She tore the offer in half. I don't want your money. Caleb stared at the pieces. You'll regret that. Mara shut the door. She waited until his truck disappeared. Then she returned to the kitchen. The children were silent. Ellie looked frightened. Mom? What? Why did that man know we were here? Mara didn't have an answer. She picked up the brass key. That night, she placed it beneath her pillow. She didn't sleep. At 3:12 a.m., she woke to a sharp crash. The kitchen window was broken. Snow covered the floor, and the wooden box containing the photograph was gone. Mara knew immediately that the window had not broken from the storm. The glass had fallen inward. The wind outside was blowing the other direction. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the snow scattered across the floor. Ellie and Noah were behind her. Mom! Stay in the bedroom. But now. Her voice was sharper than she intended. The children disappeared down the hallway. Mara picked up the fireplace poker. The cabin was silent. Too silent. She checked the front door. Locked. Back door. Locked. Then she noticed the kitchen floor. There were footprints in the snow, 2 sets. One entered through the broken window. The other stopped beside the wall. Mara followed them. The intruder had gone directly to the loose brick. The hidden box was missing, but the brass key was still beneath Mara's pillow. Whoever had entered hadn't found it. That meant they knew something. Maybe they had been watching her. Maybe they had watched Walter. Mara's hands began to shake. She grabbed the old photograph from her memory and tried to remember every detail. 3 men. The cabin. The year. And Thomas Vale. She suddenly remembered something else. The photograph had shown the men standing beside the left side of the cabin. But there was no left side wall anymore. That entire section had burned. Mara grabbed her coat. She needed answers. At sunrise, she walked through the snow to the small general store she'd passed on the way in. An elderly woman sat behind the counter. Mara placed the brass key on the counter. Do you know what this opens? The woman looked at it. Her face changed. Where did you get that? Walter Hale. The woman became quiet. My name is Ruth Mercer. Mara recognized her from the town's old mailbox photographs she'd seen near the post office. Did you know Walter's brother? Ruth nodded. For 52 years. What was he hiding? Ruth stared at the key. Then she whispered, "A piece of land. How much?" "More than Caleb Vale wants you to believe." Mara leaned closer. Ruth shook her head. "I shouldn't say more. Someone broke into my cabin last night." That changed Ruth's expression. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out an old ledger. "Walter came here 2 months ago." She opened it. On one page was a handwritten note. "If the cabin changes hands, tell her about the survey." Mara's heart raced. "What survey?" Ruth closed the book. He believed the original boundary markers had been moved. By who? Ruth looked toward the window. Vale's father. Mara stood perfectly still. "So the land in my deed isn't the land I actually own?" Ruth didn't answer. Instead, she said something that stayed with Mara all the way back to the cabin. "Your $90 didn't buy you a burned house." Mara looked at her. "It bought you a problem someone has spent 70 years trying to bury." That evening, Mara returned to the cabin. She went straight to the kitchen. The loose panel was still there. She inserted the brass key. It turned. Something clicked beneath the floor. A section of stone wall shifted backward by 1/2 an inch. Mara stopped breathing. Behind it was darkness and a narrow staircase leading down. Mara stood at the top of the staircase for almost a minute. Cold air rose from below. It smelled of damp stone, old paper, and smoke. Behind her, Ellie whispered, "Mom, don't go." Mara looked back. Noah was holding his sister's hand. She wanted to listen. She wanted to close the wall and forget the whole thing. But someone had already broken into their home, searching for whatever was down there. If she left it untouched, they might come back. So Mara took the lantern. "Stay upstairs. Lock the door behind me." Ellie shook her head. "Mom, I'll be right back." She stepped down. The staircase was narrow. 7 steps, then 12, then another 6. At the bottom was a stone corridor barely wide enough for one person. Mara moved slowly. Her boots touched something metallic. She looked down. An old brass plate was embedded in the stone, 47. BH survey. She brushed away the dirt. The corridor ended at an iron door. The brass key fit the lock. Mara turned it. The door opened with a heavy groan. Inside was a room no bigger than a bedroom, but it was packed from floor to ceiling. Wooden crates, metal filing boxes, rolled maps, photographs, ledger books, and dozens of documents tied together with faded string. Mara moved toward the nearest table. A survey map covered it. She unfolded it. Her cabin was marked in red, but so were hundreds of acres surrounding it. At the bottom of the map was a handwritten note. Original Hale Mountain Claim, 3,840 acres. Mara stared. 3,840 acres. She looked at another document. It was a property transfer from 1947. Then another. And another. The names repeated. Hale, Vale, Hale, Vale. Mara's eyes stopped on one page. It was a county survey. Someone had crossed out the original boundary lines and drawn new ones. The signature at the bottom belonged to a county surveyor, but beside it was another signature. Arthur Vale, Caleb's grandfather. Mara felt sick. This wasn't simply an inheritance. Someone had stolen land for decades. Then she saw a small metal box sitting beneath the desk. It was locked. Beside it was a note. For the person who buys the cabin with nothing left to lose. Mara's throat tightened. She opened the box. Inside were 3 original deeds. The paper was brittle and yellow. The first transferred the cabin, the second transferred mineral rights, the third covered the mountain land. But the name written across the final deed made Mara step backward. Mara Bennett. She whispered her own name. That was impossible. The deed had been prepared decades before she was born. Then she noticed the date. It wasn't new. It had been recorded 41 years earlier, and underneath her name was a handwritten sentence. "This property shall pass to the woman who carries the Bennett bloodline, if she ever arrives with children and nothing else." Mara's hands began to tremble. She had never told Walter her mother's maiden name. She had never told him about her children. Someone had been waiting for her. And suddenly the old man's warning made sense. The thing beneath the cabin wasn't alive. It was a secret. One powerful enough that people had spent decades protecting it. And Mara had just opened the door. Mara couldn't stop staring at her name. For several seconds she forgot about the cold, forgot about Caleb Vale, forgot about the broken window upstairs. All she could see was those two words written across a document older than she was. Mara Bennett. She picked up the deed with both hands. There had to be an explanation. She searched the room again. Behind the metal boxes, she found a narrow wooden drawer built into the wall. Inside was a sealed envelope. Her name was written across the front, not in a stranger's handwriting. She recognized it immediately. Walter's. Mara opened it. The letter began simply. "Mara, if you're reading this, then I was right." She stopped. Her eyes filled with tears. "You came here with your children because you had nowhere else to go. I know that sounds cruel. I know you probably believe I took advantage of your desperation. I didn't. I waited for someone like you." Mara lowered the letter. For years, she had believed her mother had been an only child. That was what she'd been told. But Walter's next words changed everything. "Your mother, Evelyn Bennett, was my brother Samuel's daughter." Mara covered her mouth. Her mother had never mentioned the Hale family. Never once. The letter explained why. Samuel Hale had discovered that Arthur Vale and several local officials had illegally altered the mountain surveys in 1947. The original Hale claim covered thousands of acres. Timber, water rights, mineral rights, and land that later became extremely valuable. Samuel refused to sign away the original documents. Then the cabin burned. Everyone assumed the papers were destroyed. They weren't. Samuel hid them underground. Walter spent the next 40 years protecting them, but he couldn't safely transfer the property back to the family. The Vales still had influence in the county, so he waited. Your mother left Black Hollow because she was afraid. She never told you who her father was because she belied. Ved's silence would keep you safe. Mara wiped her eyes. Then she read the sentence that hurt the most. I saw you years ago. You were 16. You were standing outside the grocery store with your mother. You were carrying a paper bag while she counted coins. You looked tired even then. I wondered what kind of life you would have. Mara's breath caught. Walter had known her, long before the cabin. When I heard you were struggling, I knew the time had come. I couldn't give you the property openly. Someone would have stopped you before you ever reached this mountain. So I waited until you had nothing left. Then I gave you the only thing nobody would think was valuable. The burned cabin. $90. Mara read the final paragraph twice. Don't fight them with anger, Mara. Fight them with the truth. The original deeds are only the beginning. The real proof is in the survey records. Take everything to a lawyer outside Black Hollow. And whatever happens, don't let my brother's mistake become yours. He trusted the wrong people. I trusted you. Mara folded the letter against her chest. For the first time since she had arrived, she understood why Walter had looked afraid. He hadn't been warning her about something living beneath the house. He had been warning her about the people who had spent 70 years trying to make sure the truth stayed buried. Then Mara heard tires crunching through the snow outside. She extinguished the lantern. A vehicle had stopped beside the cabin. Someone slammed the door. Then Caleb Vale's voice echoed through the darkness. "Mara!" She looked at the deeds in her hands. This time, she wasn't afraid of what was coming. She was afraid of what would happen if Caleb discovered she already had the proof. Mara did not answer Caleb. She waited until his footsteps moved away from the front door. Then she gathered the deeds, survey records, photographs, and Walter's letter into a canvas bag. The children were awake. Ellie looked at her mother's face. "Are we leaving?" "Yes." "Where?" Mara looked toward the window. "Somewhere they can't find us." They left through the rear door before sunrise. Mara drove Walter's old truck down the mountain, using a road barely visible beneath the snow. She didn't stop until they reached the county seat. At 8:14 that morning, she walked into the office of an attorney named Robert Hayes. She placed the oldest deed on his desk. "I need you to tell me if this is real." Robert adjusted his glasses. He read the document once, then again. His expression changed. "Where did you get this?" "My property." He looked up. "Mara, this isn't a simple deed." "What is it?" He turned the document toward her. "This gives you the mineral rights to the original Hale Mountain claim." "How much land?" Robert reached for an old county map. 3,840 acres. Mara stared at him. "That can't be worth much." Robert gave her a strange look. "You're sitting on land that contains the access corridor for a development project currently valued at over $12 million. Mara's heart stopped. "But Caleb offered me $18,500. Robert nodded. "Because he needed you to believe the cabin was all you owned." He spent the next several hours comparing the old documents with modern county records. The result was devastating. The original boundaries had been altered in 1947. The changes had benefited the Vale family, and Caleb had already borrowed heavily against a development project that depended on controlling Mara's land. His $18,500 offer wasn't generosity, it was desperation. 2 days later, the matter went before a county property hearing. Caleb arrived with 2 attorneys. He looked confident, until Robert placed the original survey on the table. Then the room became quiet. Caleb's attorney argued that the old documents were invalid. Robert produced certified copies from the county archive. They argued that the property had been legally transferred decades ago. Robert produced the original chain of title. Then Mara placed Walter's letter before the hearing officer. Finally, she showed them the altered survey. The signature of Arthur Vale appeared beside the false boundary. Caleb stared at it. His face had lost all color. "This is ridiculous," he said. Mara looked directly at him. "You told me the cabin was worth $18,500. Caleb said nothing. "You knew it wasn't." Still nothing. "You knew exactly what was underneath that house." The hearing officer leaned forward. "Mr. Vale, did your company submit the 1947 survey as part of its development application?" Caleb hesitated. That hesitation was enough. The county ordered an investigation. The development project was suspended. And the final appraisal came 3 weeks later. $4.8 million. Mara sat quietly when Robert told her. She thought about the $90 she had once counted on that mountain road. Then she thought about the landlord's words. "You should have planned better." For the first time, those words didn't hurt. Because the woman he had thrown into the snow had walked away with almost nothing. And somehow that was exactly how she had ended up owning the land everyone else had spent decades fighting to control. Mara did not move away from the mountain. That surprised everyone. After the legal case ended, people assumed she would sell everything, take the money, and disappear somewhere warm. Instead, she repaired the cabin. Not because she needed it, because it was the place where her children had survived. The roof was rebuilt first, then the windows, then the damaged kitchen floor. Mara kept the old stone fireplace exactly as it was. She even preserved the small brass symbol on the wall. 3 lines through a circle. The hidden staircase remained sealed behind a new steel door, and the original documents were moved into a secure archive in town. The $4.8 million changed her life. But it didn't change the things that mattered most to her. She bought Noah a proper winter coat, the first one that belonged entirely to him. She bought Ellie a red bicycle. For months, Ellie had talked about wanting one, but had stopped asking because she knew her mother couldn't afford it. Mara also paid off every debt she had. The first thing she bought for herself was not a car. It was the silver bracelet her mother had once owned. She found it through the woman who had bought it from the pawn shop. Mara paid $83 for it. The bracelet was scratched. The clasp was loose. She loved it anyway. 1 year after the blizzard, Mara stood on the cabin porch watching snow fall across the mountain. The house behind her was warm. Light spilled through every window. Noah was asleep upstairs. Ellie was sitting beside the fireplace, reading. On the mantel was a framed photograph of Walter. Beside it was a copy of the original deed. Mara had also used part of the inheritance to create a small emergency fund for families in Black Hollow who found themselves facing eviction during the winter. No advertisements, no plaque with her name, just money available when someone needed a place to sleep. She never forgot what it felt like to have $90 and nowhere to go. That evening, Ellie came onto the porch. "Mom?" "What? Do you still hear the knocking?" Mara smiled. "No." Ellie looked toward the floor. "Were you really scared?" Mara thought about that first night, the frozen chimney, Noah's blue lips, the broken cabin, the footsteps outside, the voice beneath the floor. "Yes," she said. "Very." Ellie leaned against her. "Then why didn't you leave?" Mara looked through the window at the warm room where her children were safe. "Because you were inside." Snow continued falling around them. Deep beneath the repaired cabin, the old hidden room remained exactly where Walter had left it. Silent. Locked. Its secret finally belonging to the family it had been hidden from. Mara touched the old bracelet around her wrist. She had once believed that losing everything was the worst thing that could happen to a person. She understood differently now. Sometimes, losing the life that was trapping you was the first step toward finding the one you were supposed to have. And outside, the mountain disappeared beneath another blanket of snow. But this time, Mara watched it from behind a warm window. And her children never had to be afraid of the cold again.